Blood sprayed across the observation glass like a fine red mist. The alien students recoiled, mandibles twitching, oculars dilating in horror. Some clutched their translator implants as if they'd failed to believe what was being said. On the other side of the chamber, the human, barely 1.8 meters tall and covered in sweat and grime, grunted through clenched teeth as he pulled a jagged piece of metal from his own leg. Without hesitation, he reached into a pouch, slapped on a foam gel bandage that hissed and smoked, then jammed a stimpin into his thigh. His heart rate spiked to triple. He laughed. Not out of madness, but triumph. That's better. Pains. Just weakness bleeding out, he said cheerfully, standing as if he hadn't just treated a gaping wound himself. Several alien students fainted on the spot. One, a pale blue Varnaxi from the FAL system, vomited a milky fluid onto the floor and collapsed into its own mucus. Others were too shocked to speak. The human looked up at them through the glass, gave a thumbs up, and limped out of the chamber like nothing had happened. That was the first hour of the Intergalactic Peacekeeper Academy's newest elective, Survival Medical Sciences, Deathworld Field Triage, co-instructed by humans. It was also the last time any alien in that class would ever feel comfortable around their Terran peers again. The Peacekeeper Academy, nestled in the orbit of the neutral world Halcyon 3, was the Concord's pride, an elite training center where alien species learned diplomacy, warfare theory, planetary relief, and galactic medical science. For centuries, medicine had been the domain of peace-delicate work for sophisticated hands, often using remote nanocrawlers, gentle sonic pulses, or photosynthetic cellular patches that healed tissue over time. But Earth had changed everything. Humans, new to the Concord, were designated as a Class 12 Deathworld species, a polite way of saying their planet was a nightmare cocktail of radiation, predators, pathogens, tectonics, and gravity. Their biology, psychology, and worst of all, adaptability, defied everything the other species knew about life. They were, in many ways, the great question mark in an otherwise orderly galactic society. And now, for the first time ever, human instructors had been allowed to run a class after countless war zones had proven just how effective their brutal methods could be. Against Concord objections, the High Council had approved a pilot course to expand cross-species resilience training. To the alien cadets, it was a curiosity, a novelty, something to check off before returning to their more civilized coursework. But then came the first day. The human instructor, Ensign Victor Reyes, walked into the lecture hall with a duffel bag full of rusty tools, stimulants, 4 bags, tourniquets, and what appeared to be a cauterizer forged from a plasma torch. No drones, no robotic arms, just raw, practical gear that looked more suited to battlefield torture than life-saving procedures. He introduced himself in perfect Concordian dialect. Today we're going to teach you how to survive when you've got half your guts in your hands and no help on the way. Welcome to Deathworld First Aid. There were snickers. Even the instructor from the Yalaxi delegation smirked. His people could regenerate limbs with nutrient-rich algae baths. Then Reyes demonstrated a live trauma protocol. He slashed his own thigh with a sterilized blade, mimicking a shrapnel wound. The horror was instantaneous. The Varnaxi student shrieked. A plumed Levisari darted for the exit, but tripped over his own tail. Reyes treated the injury casually while explaining each step, pointing out pressure zones and explaining why painkillers were optional. Because sometimes you don't want to dull your senses. Might need to fight right after. Can't fight. If you're loopy. The alien students couldn't process it. He was teaching pain endurance as a medical tool. When asked why he didn't wait for a medical drone, Reyes chuckled. Because in the field, there's no drone. Just you, your squad, and your willingness to stay alive. By the end of the session, only 5 of the 22 alien students had remained conscious. The rest had either fled, fainted, or called for psychological evaluation. The Academy Board issued an immediate review, but the footage went viral on the ConcordNet. The humans, expected to be a backwater curiosity, had shocked the galaxy. And, as always where there was fear, there was fascination. No one had expected it. Certainly not the alien cadets, bred on clean rooms and painless recovery tanks. But the first seeds of a new fear were planted. As one of the students whispered that night in hushed, shaking tones to her bunkmate, "If this is how they treat themselves." The antiseptic scent still clung to the halls of Wing G when the next class gathered. No one spoke. The usual chatter of species-specific food preferences or exam grumbling had vanished. Even the buzzing socialites from the Ilari swarm hive sat in twitchy silence. The first class with the human had spread through the academy like a virus, horrifying, unstoppable, and impossible to forget. They'd seen him bleed, not as a mistake, but as instruction. And then smile through it. Instructor Reyes entered again, with the same duffel bag, dragging it behind him like a sack of bones. The students flinched at the sound of its zippers. No one dared mock him now. "Good morning," he said brightly, like this was an art class and not a crash course in surviving hell. "Hope you've all had breakfast. Today we're covering makeshift airways and battlefield amputations." Several aliens groaned aloud. One purple-scaled Uluxi looked genuinely green around the frills. A Talari hybrid discreetly edged toward the exit. Reyes clapped his hands. "No volunteers? Shame. Guess I'll have to use the training dummy this time." The tension broke slightly. A few nervous chuckles, relieved sighs. But that was short-lived. The dummy wasn't a clean chrome and plasteel humanoid model like the ones they used in the academy. No, Reyes unrolled what looked like a half-melted combat mannequin from some forgotten battlefield. Its skin was synthetic flesh laced with old plasma scorch marks, and what looked horrifyingly like real blood residue. The stench of old polymer burns made several students gag. "We pulled this from an abandoned Terran training base on Chiron 9. Reyes said casually. "Used to be standard for medics during the Europa conflicts. That was a nice war. Cold, fast, and messy." He demonstrated inserting a tube down its scorched throat, explained how to identify crushed lungs, how to reset. A jaw with elbow torque. Everything was loud, wet, visceral, but it was when he pulled out the bone saw reel, manual, and streaked with crimson, that the mood shifted again. This ... is when you learn what kind of person you are. The students watched in abject silence as he sawed through the synthetic limb, explaining blood flow control and pressure bands as if reading from a cookbook. Not one of them spoke. They couldn't. Their minds were caught between fascination and nausea. After the class, a quiet alien student named Carixa Thin, translucent skinned Zithari with a high empathy cortex approached Reyes, trembling. "Why? Why is it so important to be able to do these things manually?" Curix asked. "Surely there's always some tool or drone or support AI." Reyes didn't smile this time. His tone dropped an octave. "There's not always help. Not in the dark. Not when comms are down. Sometimes it's just you and your squad mate bleeding out next to you, begging for 5 more minutes of life. You don't think. You act, fast, dirty, effective, because that's what we do. But the pain," Curix murmured. "How do humans endure so much pain?" Reyes looked him dead in the eye. "We don't just endure it. We weaponize it." Word of that line spread faster than a viral meme across the academy. It wasn't long before cadets from other disciplines began sneaking into the human sessions, officers in training, engineers, even xenobiologists curious about the pain rituals of Earth. The Concord's official channels began issuing gentle warnings about overattendance, citing psychological strain and emotional distress incidents linked to the class. One memo even referred to Reyes's methods as intentionally traumatic. He framed the memo and mounted it on the classroom wall. But the real shift began when aliens started reporting strange dreams, nightmares of broken bodies still walking, of humans setting bones with grit teeth and marching back into gunfire, of battlefield laughter echoing through smoke. One Livisari cadet, renowned for his serene temperament, was caught murmuring in his sleep, "They don't fear pain, they drink it." The instructors from other species began to worry. They met in hushed tones. Something was wrong. The human's course wasn't just teaching first aid. It was eroding the foundations of how the Concord approached trauma, healing, and survival. For centuries, medicine had meant progress, peace, and painless restoration. But the humans didn't treat injury as something to be avoided at all costs. To them, it was a certainty, a constant, a factor to account for, not fear. And in that, they were utterly alien. More troubling, though, was how a few students began to admire it. A Zolvari noble whose people considered physical contact taboo was seen attempting to reset a minor dislocation in his own arm, gritting his teeth as he'd seen Reyes do. A recording of the attempt circulated, titled, "Becoming Human." One of the senior Concord lecturers reviewed the footage and simply said, "We've opened something we weren't ready for." Back in Wing G, Reyes ended the class by casually asking the students, "If your squad mate was bleeding out and screaming, would you break their ribs to keep them alive? Would you hurt them to help them?" He didn't wait for the answer. He just walked out, and behind him, silence. But in that silence, one thing grew clear in every alien mind present. They were no longer certain who the monsters really were. The archival room beneath the academy hummed softly, illuminated only by the glow of ancient data scrolls and crystalline knowledge cores. It was here that Kurix found himself pacing sleepless, shaken, and searching. He hadn't meant to be drawn this deeply into the mystery of humans. At first, they were a curiosity, a walking contradiction. Brutal yet intelligent, crass but clever. But after 3 weeks of Deathworld first aid, he no longer saw them as confusing. He saw them as terrifying. He pulled another scroll from the Earth archive and fed it into the reader. Holograms flickered to life footage from something called the Siege of Fallujah. No drones, no medbeds. Just shaky video of bleeding humans dragging wounded comrades through rubble, tying off arteries with shoelaces, using cigarette lighters to sterilize combat knives. All while explosions echoed in the background. They should have died, every one of them. But they didn't. They got up, patched themselves, and kept fighting. The room chilled. Kurix pulled another file. A jungle war this time. A human soldier trapped under a collapsed structure amputated his own leg with a shard of metal, cauterized the stump on a flaming piece of debris, and crawled for 8 kilometers before being found. He slammed the reader off and collapsed into a chair, his breath misting in the cool air. "This isn't evolution," he whispered. "This is obsession." A voice behind him made him jump. Obsession implies choice. For us, there wasn't one. Reyes stood at the threshold, hands in his pockets. Kurix flinched, ashamed to be caught. "I was just trying to understand." Reyes stepped inside slowly, eyes calm. "You won't find understanding in the records, just history. If you want truth, I'll give it to you." He sat across from Kurix, pulling a worn photo from his uniform pocket. It was old, creased, stained with what looked like blood. In it were 7 humans in mismatched armor, smiling despite the smoke behind them. My old unit. The bastards of Black Ridge. We had medics, sure, but most of what we learned the hard way. Kurix looked at him, hesitating. "But why fight like that? Why heal like that? You had painkillers. You had choices." Reyes met his eyes, and for the first time, there was no humor in his face. "You think we fight through pain because we like it? We do it because we have to. Because on Earth, if you wait for help, you die. The floodwaters don't care if you're scared. The wolves don't stop if your arm's broken. And the bullets, they don't care if you're in a med tent or not. He leaned forward, voice low, so we trained our pain into fuel. We taught ourselves to use it. Outside the room, the air shifted. A low tremor vibrated through the academy floor. Alarms briefly flashed red in the hall before resetting. No announcement followed. Kurix and Reyes both looked toward the door. That's the third tremor this week. Kurix muttered. Reyes stood slowly, eyes hardening. Those aren't tectonic. That same night, in the cadet dormitories, something worse began to unravel. The alien students had started mimicking human techniques badly. A group of ambitious Solari attempted a pain endurance challenge by cutting and cauterizing minor wounds on themselves, trying to train up like the humans. One passed out from the shock. Another went into cardiac arrest. The third tried to inject a Terran stimulant and had to be resuscitated. The Academy emergency ward buzzed with panic. Instructors argued. They're romanticizing it, a Yulaxi medic hissed. They're trying to be human without understanding the cost. But the humans said nothing. Reyes, when asked to comment, simply said, "We told them not to." The incident prompted the Academy's High Circle to review whether the human course should be discontinued. They never got the chance, because the very next day, the power grid collapsed across 4 decks. Communications failed. Fire suppression. Systems tripped, despite no detected flames. And then came the message broadcast in every language, to every classroom and hallway. We are the pure concordance. And we reject the infection of Deathworlders. The humans will leave, or we will make them leave. Panic gripped the halls. A terrorist group radicalized xenophobes who believed in galactic purity had infiltrated the Academy. For most, it was a crisis. But for the humans, it was routine. While security forces scrambled, Reyes and the other Terran instructors were already setting up triage zones, rerouting power manually, and preparing medkits by hand. A Concord general, attempting to coordinate a response, stumbled into Reyes prepping a trauma bay and demanded, "How are you this calm?" Reyes barely looked up. "You've got a security breach." "Yes, we've had invasions," Reyes muttered. "You haven't even breathed on panic yet." By the time the pure concordance operatives activated their next sabotage point, they found it guarded by students, not just humans. Aliens, who had trained under Reyes and learned just enough to take pain, hold pressure, and hold a line. And deep in one of the lecture halls, a broken training dummy lay discarded. Its arm was missing. In its place stood a Varnaxi cadet, chest rising. With effort, a human tourniquet strapped around his midsection. He'd been injured, but he wasn't running. He was stabilizing 2 wounded students, with shaking hands, with blood on his claws, and with Reyes's voice in his mind, sometimes to save a life, you have to bleed first. The aliens had come to study humanity. Now they were realizing something far worse. They had become them. The emergency lights bathed the halls of the Peacekeeper Academy in pulsing red. Doors sealed with hydraulic hisses, and the sterile corridors, normally filled with the quiet chatter of interstellar scholars, now echoed with sirens and the pounding boots of security teams, moving with far less confidence than they claimed. Humans, meanwhile, moved like they'd rehearsed this 1,000 times. Because they had. Reyes sprinted down the main artery of Wing C, a compact medpack slung over one shoulder, his other arm keeping a wounded Ilari cadet upright. The insectoid student's wing membranes were torn, ichor dripping from a jagged plasma burn on his abdomen. He was already slipping into shock. Reyes slammed his shoulder into a sealed door and barked to the trembling cadets behind him. "Cover the corridor. If one more terrorist gets through that maintenance hatch, we're done here." 3 alien cadets hesitated, then obeyed. They weren't soldiers. They'd studied diplomacy, interspecies ethics, Orbital physics. Now they held scavenged plasma pistols in unsteady hands. Standing between their fellow students and death. Inside the lecture room, Reyes laid the Ilari cadet on the floor and pulled out a field syringe. He jammed it into the alien's thorax and squeezed. The student screamed a keening sound so loud that others flinched. "You'll live," Reyes said, already unpacking a bone knitter and a fluid transfuser. "No dying in my classroom, that's a rule." More wounded poured in. The pure concordance sabotage had triggered cascading failures across the academy. Tunnels flooded with biohazards. Gravity lifts reversed. Infirmary droids were offline intentionally. The terrorists hadn't just come to make a statement. They'd come to kill humans by making them irrelevant. By removing every tool they relied on, except the humans. Didn't need tools, they needed a reason. And this was more than enough. Elsewhere, a human instructor named LT, Imani, had taken control of a medbay with no power and only 2 working scalpels. She and 3 alien students turned it into a fully functional trauma center, using glow panels for light and sterilized broken table legs for splints. She performed a lung incision using her belt buckle and told the patient to bite down on a rolled-up glove. And when the room started to fill with smoke from an adjacent explosion, she didn't even blink. "This," she muttered, slicing through a cauterized artery, "is a slow day on Earth." The aliens watched in awe and horror as she worked. Not because of what she was doing, but how casually she did it. How deeply ingrained it was. The Terrans didn't adapt to chaos. They thrived in it. In the command chamber above, the senior faculty was in freefall. Concord procedures were too slow. Communication nodes were compromised. Defensive droids hadn't responded to override commands. But when the Dean of Strategy reviewed security feeds, he saw something incredible. Humans leading the resistance, not the security officers. Not the protocol-compliant commandos. Just Reyes and his ragtag squad of first aid cadets, alien students, now covered in plasma soot and dried blood, were pushing back against the pure concordant strike teams with surgical efficiency, and not with superior weapons, with superior will. The feeds showed them building barricades from flipped tables, stabilizing their injured without nanobots, organizing relays, and holding corridors through sheer nerve and pain tolerance. Some of the students had been shot. Others burned. None of them left the line. Reyes, back in Wing C, pulled a fallen Zoldari behind cover and ripped open a stimpack. The alien blinked up at him, dazed. "You're not even afraid," the Zoldari muttered. "I'm always afraid," Reyes answered, teeth clenched. "But I know what to do with it." He rose and fired a single shot down the corridor, tagging a pure concordant sniper trying to flank their position. Reyes never paused. He moved to the next student needing help. By now, even the other instructors were stunned. A Varnaxi professor leaned over a console, watching as one of his own species, normally known for sensitivity to even mild discomfort, tightened a splint on a shattered leg and waved off help, mimicking human bravado. "Keep going," the cadet grunted. "We've got lives to save." The Varnaxi professor slowly sat back in his chair, mandibles quivering. "They're becoming like them," he whispered. "No," said another instructor from behind. "They're surviving like them." In the lower wings, the pure concordance was faltering. Their operatives expected fear, chaos, and surrender. Instead, they were ambushed by aliens performing human triage under fire. Caught off guard by tactics involving distraction wounds, injuring one of their own to bait enemy attention, then striking. These were not tactics taught by the Concord. These were the scars of Deathworld logic. Pain was a tool. Chaos was cover. Emotion was fuel. Human students had long learned it. Now the aliens were learning it. By the end of the 4th hour, the Academy's emergency systems had been partially restored, but not by the engineers, not by the humans, because while the command center debated risk tolerance, A trio of Turan instructors manually restarted the core relays with insulated wire and a metal bar they bent with their bare hands. The lights came back on, and the terrorists, watching the tides turn, began to retreat, but not fast enough, because they had made a mistake far greater than underestimating humanity. They had inspired others to stop underestimating them. Now, every alien who had witnessed Reyes splint a shattered limb with a datapad, or seen LT, Imani inject a dying friend with pain suppressants made from coolant extract, every single one knew one thing for certain: the humans weren't just dangerous, they were unstoppable, and they were teaching others how to be the same. Smoke choked the hallways. Emergency bulkheads wheezed shut, trapping the last of the retreating Pure Concordance operatives between corridors of locked doors and reinforced barricades. From the shadows, shapes moved quick, deliberate, unhindered by fear. They weren't military. They were students. Led by humans. Reyes crouched behind a collapsed wall. Blood streaked down one side of his face where shrapnel had torn his brow. He didn't notice it. His eyes were fixed on the holographic map his makeshift squad had patched together using pieces of fried terminals and emergency beacons. Concordant stragglers are holed up in Sector D6, said Cathari, an insectoid cadet with burn marks across her carapace. She hadn't left the field since the first explosions. They've rerouted power to create a makeshift barricade. Then we go through the wall, Reyes said. The cadet stared at him. It's reinforced titanium, Histon Uluxi with a fractured spine plate. Reyes pulled out a thermal breaching tool made from a modified field torch and a compressed plasma canister. I said. He repeated, we go through the wall. They moved. Elsewhere, within the secure lower-level conference chamber, the high circle of the academy argued over policy and protocol while the crisis raged above them. They still clung to the idea that reinforcements were minutes away. They still spoke of restoring order and containing panic. But they had lost control hours ago. Not to the terrorists, to the humans. One of the counselors, a tall crystalline Silinari, turned to a trembling security aide. Why haven't they fallen back to the safe zones? The aide hesitated. They said they weren't safe. The human said nowhere is safe unless they make it safe. The counselor stared, unable to comprehend. Another instructor, a Crixon elder with 70 years of pacifist training, stood in silence, watching security feeds that showed bloodied human instructors hauling injured alien cadets on their backs, dodging gunfire while administering field injections, setting bones in stairwells, cauterizing wounds with fusion cutters, and issuing orders that actually worked. He spoke only once. Protocol has failed. Brutality has not. Back in Sector D6, Reyes and his team blasted through the wall. The thermal breach scorched the chamber with a flash of white-hot fury, and before the smoke cleared, the humans were already inside. The terrorists were waiting. Guns leveled. Confidence high, until they saw who had come for them. Not armored Concord enforcers. Not precision drone squadrons. A ragtag group of medics and students, burned, limping, injured, but somehow standing. The humans didn't even flinch when the first shots rang out. Reyes rolled behind a crate and barked, suppressing fire left. Flank around on my mark. The aliens followed without hesitation. A Levisari cadet with a splinted leg lunged forward, returning fire while a Vanaxi classmate dragged a wounded human back to cover. Chaos, pain, screams, and from it, victory. The Pure Concordance broke under the assault. Their polished discipline shattered by the sheer unpredictability of the enemy, an enemy who would not stop, who bled and grinned and used their own agony as leverage. The fight ended in 8 minutes. Reyes limped to the center of the barricade and picked up the discarded Concordance flag. He stared at it for a second, then threw it into the corner and sat down hard on a crate. Finally breathing, they had won. But the real twist came after. A Concord strike team finally arrived, too late for anything but cleanup. As they secured the remnants of the Concordance operatives, they began collecting testimony from the cadets. It was there they learned something strange, something impossible. Some of the alien students hadn't just followed the humans. They'd fought like them, bleeding out and still firing, ignoring pain, improvising weapons, administering brutal but effective medical treatment using human-taught field techniques, and more chilling, many of them had survived wounds their species shouldn't have. Reyes was summoned to speak with the investigation team. He leaned on a crutch, face half-bandaged, and listened as a Talari medical officer laid it out. These cadets should be dead. You're pushing them beyond biological limits. Some of them were healing faster. Adrenal responses spiked beyond evolutionary safe zones. Pain thresholds raised by more than 400%. What the hell did you do to them? Reyes looked at the officer, then pulled a small patch from his coat pocket and tossed it onto the table. It read, Kabar Battalion, pain is temporary, victory isn't. We didn't do anything, Reyes said. We just showed them what it takes to survive. The rest? That's their choice. But it wasn't just mindset. Deep in the Academy's secure lab, scientists began scanning the wounded cadets. And what they found was staggering. Neural pathways had begun to reconfigure under prolonged exposure to high stress. Fieldwork, especially in students trained directly by human instructors. Their bodies were adapting. Fast. Too fast. The Deathworlder mindset wasn't just psychological. It was contagious. That night, the human instructors gathered outside the main triage tent. The worst had passed. The fires were out. The wounded were stable. And the cadets were changed. I've seen some things, said Altai Imani, watching a group of Varnaxi cadets practice field splints by moonlight. But this? Reyes nodded. Slowly, we didn't just teach them first aid. We taught them something older. She raised an eyebrow. What? Warrior medicine. Silence. Then, behind them, a voice. You didn't teach us that. They turned. It was Kurix, face still scarred, eyes no longer shaking. You taught us what it means to refuse to die. They had come to teach. To help. Instead, they had triggered something else. A galactic change. And the pure concordance, now rotting in their holding cells, had no idea what they'd unleashed. They had tried to purge humanity, but all they'd done was spark a war that could never be undone. The storm broke at dawn. A scorched, bleeding sun rose over Halcyon 3's horizon as the Peacekeeper Academy entered its final day under siege. But this time, it wasn't the pure concordance who controlled the tempo. They had tried to snuff out humanity. They had failed. Now humanity, and everyone who had trained under them, was coming for them. They had triggered a war, and humans were terrifying in war. Sector A, once a botanical atrium, had been converted into a forward combat triage. Its flower beds were now sandbagged cover. Its irrigation lines rerouted into plasma-cooled field IVs. Behind the defensive perimeter, alien cadets, burned, scarred, some still shaking, strapped on makeshift armor. Their instructors stood beside them, human medics with bloodied gloves and steel eyes. LT. Imani walked the line like a ghost in combat boots. Her voice was low, steady. Remember the drills. Keep moving, keep breathing, and if you can't do either, make sure the next one behind you can. A Levisari cadet raised a hand. What if we get wounded in the field? Reyes, passing by with a heavy repeater slung over his shoulder and a field kit bouncing against his hip, turned. You'll fix yourself, or someone will fix you. And if it hurts, he paused, smiling grimly. Good, that means you're still alive. A low boom echoed across the compound. The final assault had begun. The pure concordance launched everything they had in one desperate push. Dozens of them, armored in disruptor plating, surged through breached corridors and access hatches, flanking from above and below. They expected disorganized resistance. They expected fear. They got none. The human-led cadets hit them like a surgical strike wrapped in chaos. From hidden flanking tunnels, Varnaxi students popped smoke grenades made from vaporized algae and cleaning agents, learned in the Human Improvised Tactics lecture. Talari hybrids used broken plasma casings to create flashbangs that disoriented the Concordance fighters. Humans pushed forward to the smoke like death-given shape, administering point-blank field aid without ever dropping their weapons. LT. Imani carried a wounded cadet over her shoulder, firing one-handed while barking instructions in a dozen languages. When her arm was grazed by shrapnel, she didn't flinch, just shoved a coagulant stick into the wound and kept moving. Reyes was worse. He led a breach into the main control tower, limping on a half-functional leg, blood matting his uniform. He used a training shield reinforced with surgical trays as cover and bashed through the security locks with a trauma cutter. Inside, 2 pure Concordance snipers waited. One fired caught Reyes in the shoulder. The other aimed at the cadet behind him. Reyes screamed, not in pain, but in rage, and threw himself forward, smashing both men against the far wall in a blur of close-quarters violence learned not in a dojo or on a range, but in Earth's cities, jungles, and deserts. He didn't stop until they were unconscious. Then he pulled the plasma bolt from his shoulder and pressed a field heater to the wound. The cadet behind him, frozen, whispered, "Sir." "That was insane," Reyes grimaced. "That was Tuesday." Below, on the Academy's ground level, the last pure Concordance charge slammed into a defensive line, held by alien student species who had never seen combat before this week. They fought like they had been born for it, because they had been trained by Deathworlders. A Solari cadet dragged a wounded classmate behind cover and screamed, "I need a splint and a thermal sealer." From behind, another alien tossed a fragment of a chair leg and a hot iron. "Improvise." And she did. Across the battlefield, the Concordance's advance faltered. Their lines broke not from superior firepower, but from a force they could not understand. Not soldiers, survivors, fighters who would crawl if they couldn't walk, stitch their own skin if they couldn't wait, and carry each other through hell. On shattered legs, the humans weren't leading a squad anymore. They were leading a movement. The final confrontation came at the Academy's command spire. The last of the pure Concordance, cornered, sealed themselves within. Reyes led the breach with 4 human instructors and a dozen alien cadets, all of them carrying wounds, stories, and a newfound fury. "Go in fast," Reyes muttered as the plasma torch hissed into the blast door. "No mercy. No hesitation. And remember." He looked back at his team, at the burned Ilari, the one-eyed Varnaxi, the Talari with the missing hand, every single one of them marked forever. "We don't stop until they know why they should have feared us." The doors blew inward. The fight didn't last 2 minutes. When it ended, Reyes stood over the Concordance leader, blood dripping from his fingertips, face unreadable. "You came here to scare us," he said, crouching. "But we're human. We're the fire you tried to control." Then he walked away. The battle was over, not cleanly, not neatly, but completely. Emergency medical droids arrived 12 hours too late. Concord military swept the area. The terrorists were detained, systems restored. Order, in the political sense, was re-established, but no one cared about politics anymore. They cared about who had actually saved the Academy. It wasn't the high circle. It wasn't the defense systems. It was the humans, and those they had trained. The cadets were no longer just scholars of peace. They had scars now, and those scars had meaning. At the base of the shattered courtyard, someone erected a makeshift sign out of broken consoles and medpack straps. On it, a phrase was scrawled in at least 12 languages. "First aid doesn't mean first surrender," and beneath it, "Deathworld trained. Galaxy ready." The galaxy would never be the same. Because in one school, on one day, A group of alien students learned the most important human lesson of all. You don't need to be unbreakable. You just need to keep going anyway, and the universe would never underestimate them again. The Academy's skies were still stained with ash when the first official reports began to circulate. Drones cleaned the blood off the tiles. Burnt metal was pried from walls and replaced with polished alloy. Damaged wings of the facility were patched up like nothing had ever happened. But something had happened. Something no amount of cosmetic repair could erase. Across the galaxy, footage leaked. Not the sanitized Concorde versions, but raw, shaky vids from cadet body cams and handheld devices, alien students dragging each other through smoke. Medics cauterizing wounds with field torches. Human instructors breaking bones back into place. Mid-firefight. And in every clip, one thing was unmistakable. Humanity standing in the fire, not flinching, not retreating. Leading. The Concorde Council scrambled to manage the fallout. Official memos spoke of unforeseen extremity, valuable crisis response data, and deep concerns regarding field ethics. But those words rang hollow next to the images of Reyes, bleeding from 2 wounds, laughing as he pulled a wounded cadet from the rubble with one arm. Back on Halcyon 3, the Academy attempted to resume normal instruction. Classes reopened, lectures resumed, but nothing felt the same. The students walked differently, now straighter, eyes forward, shoulders squared. Their hands trembled less, and for many of them, medical science would never again be just theory. They'd learned it under fire, on the Academy's training field. The old trauma dummies had been retired. In their place stood new models, less pristine, more real, cracked synthetic bones, simulated blood loss, audible screams. Created by human engineers. At the edge of the field, Kuruk stood in silence, his chitinous fingers curled around a data slate. He was different now. His eyes no longer scanned for threats, they anticipated them. He'd started assisting with instruction, helping human medics translate survival tactics into alien physiology. Reyes walked up beside him, nodding once. You handled yourself well. Kuruk tilted his head, eyes thoughtful. You know, before this, we thought we understood pain, trauma, even war. You didn't, Reyes said, without judgment. No, Kuruk agreed. We didn't, but we do now. He hesitated, then added, not just how to survive it, but why you humans never let it stop you. Reyes watched the cadets across the field, alien and human, practicing together, simulating wounds, helping each other, getting stronger. It's not about being fearless, he said. It's about doing the job anyway. Because someone else is counting on you. Because giving up means letting them die. Kuruk looked down at his own hands, scarred and steady. And now, that's what we carry too. Across the galaxy, things began to change. Medical protocols, once based solely on precision and comfort, now included optional Deathworld triage tracks. Only volunteers could take them, yet they quickly filled. Dozens of species signed up. The training wasn't pleasant, but neither was the universe. And finally, alien civilizations were beginning to understand what Earth had always known, that life didn't ask permission to hurt you, and survival didn't wait for elegance. In a station orbiting Thalix Prime, a rookie squad responded to a chemical fire in a collapsed mine. No drones, no guidance, just a few cadets and a half-charged medkit. They used human methods. Everyone made it out alive. When asked how they did it, one cadet, a wide-eyed Talari barely out of her second year, answered, "We stopped thinking like doctors. We started thinking like humans." In the Peacekeeper Academy's Hall of Commendation, a new plaque was installed. Not to honor a species, not to honor a rank, but a course, Deathworld First Aid, for those who bled, broke, and endured, and chose to help others anyway. Below it, the names of every cadet and instructor who fought during the attack were engraved. Not one name was missing. Even those who fell were etched in with quiet reverence. When Reyes stood before the wall, he didn't say anything for a long time. Lt. Imani joined him, sipping from a dented canteen. "You think the galaxy's ready for this?" He shook his head. "No, but it's coming anyway." They both smiled. Weeks later, a new class of alien cadets entered Wing, bright-eyed, idealistic, unscarred. They sat in neat rows. The door opened. Reyes walked in again, duffel bag over his shoulder, blood-stained patch still stitched to his coat. He set a battered dummy on the table. "This is Trauma Unit 1. She's been through worse than most of you ever will. Today we're gonna learn how to keep someone alive with one hand, a broken rib, and no sleep." He paused. "I'm not here to teach you comfort. I'm here to teach you survival. You want comfort? Go take hydrotherapy. You want to walk out of a blast zone with someone still breathing next to you? Silence. Then welcome to the fire." And no one looked away. The galaxy had tried to measure the humans by their machines, their numbers, their status, but it was never about that. It was about what they carried inside, what they passed on to anyone willing to bleed to learn it. The ability to walk through hell and bring someone else back with you. Humanity had changed the battlefield. Now they were changing medicine, and the stars would never forget.